The year was 1787. In the rolling hills of what would become the Zulu kingdom, a scandal was unfolding. Nandi, daughter of a neighboring chief, claimed she carried the child of Senzangakona, chief of the minor Zulu clan. This was no royal courtship, it was an illicit affair, a violation of sacred tradition. When Nandi first announced her pregnancy, Senzangakona's court erupted in cruel laughter. "She's not pregnant," they mocked. "It's just an Ishaka, an intestinal beetle, causing her belly to swell." But when the baby arrived, healthy and crying, that cruel joke became his name. Shaka, a permanent brand of shame, a daily reminder that he was the child nobody wanted. Though Senzangakona eventually made Nandi his third wife, the damage was done. In a society where lineage was everything, Shaka was marked as illegitimate. He and his mother became targets of relentless torment, outsiders in their own home, symbols of transgression. The bullying grew unbearable. Other children taunted him as the fatherless one. Court rivals humiliated his mother openly. Finally, Senzangakona made his choice. He cast them out. Mother and son became wanderers, seeking refuge wherever they could find it. First, they returned to Nandi's people, the Lengeni. But even there, they were treated as despised outcasts. After a devastating famine forced them to move again, they finally found sanctuary with the powerful Mthethwa people, led by the visionary chief Dingiswayo. Imagine the scars this childhood carved into a young boy's soul. He learned that family ties could be weapons of pain. He watched his mother, the only person who loved him, suffer because of her connection to his father. He saw how the very structure of family and lineage brought nothing but misery. In those years of exile and abuse, historians believe something crystallized in Shaka's mind. Family was weakness. Heirs were rivals. Personal connections were liabilities he couldn't afford. The boy tormented for his bloodline would grow into a man determined to build an empire that answered to him alone, not to the messy, unreliable bonds of kinship. But exile was also Shaka's crucible. Among the Mthethwa, Dingiswayo saw what others missed, not an outcast, but a warrior of extraordinary potential. When Shaka came of age, he joined the Mthethwa age-grade regiment. Finally, he found a place where he belonged. And he didn't just excel, he revolutionized warfare itself. Traditional battles were ritualized affairs. Armies stood at distance, hurled long throwing spears called assegais, and often disengaged with minimal casualties. To Shaka, this was a foolish game. He envisioned something terrifying, total, decisive, lethal warfare. His innovations changed African military history, the Ikla. He discarded the throwing spear and created a short, broad-bladed stabbing weapon, supposedly named for the sucking sound it made when pulled from a human body. The Ikla demanded face-to-face combat, a brutal, intimate dance of death. The heavy shield. He developed larger shields for both offense and defense, using them to hook opponents' shields aside and expose them to the fatal thrust. Barefoot warriors. He famously made his soldiers discard their sandals, believing it improved their speed and footing on all terrain. The bull's horns formation, Impondo Zankamo, his most legendary tactic, divided the army into 4 parts. The chest engaged the enemy head-on. The horns swept around both flanks to encircle the loins, waited in reserve to finish survivors. This tactic turned battles into massacres, but Shaka was building more than military tactics. He was engineering a new social order. He organized warriors into highly disciplined units called Amabutho age regiments that deliberately separated men from their families and clans. Their old identities were erased, replaced by a singular loyalty, not to their clan, but to Shaka. To cement this control, he instituted a radical policy. His warriors were forbidden to marry. For men in their prime, family life was outlawed. Marriage wasn't a right, it was a reward granted only after many years of service. Often when men reached their late 30s or 40s, the strategic brilliance was brutal. A warrior with a wife and children has competing loyalties. But a warrior whose only family is his regiment and whose only father is his king has nothing to distract him. Shaka was creating a generation of men wedded not to women, but to war. In 1816, fate's wheel turned. Senzangakona died. With Dingiswayo's military backing, Shaka returned to the Zulu clan and swiftly assassinated his half-brother to seize the throne. Soon after, Dingiswayo was killed by a rival. Shaka absorbed the Mthethwa forces into his own. The final restraint on his ambition vanished. What followed was the Mfekan, the crushing, a period of explosive, brutal expansion that would reshape southern Africa. Shaka unleashed his disciplined war machine on neighboring clans. His message was simple: submit or be annihilated. Those who bent the knee were absorbed into the growing Zulu nation. Those who resisted faced total warfare, their crops burned, their cattle seized, their warriors slaughtered, their survivors scattered. In a terrifyingly short time, the Zulu transformed from a minor clan of perhaps 1,500 people into the most dominant power in the region, commanding an army of over 40,000 warriors. Shaka now stood at the apex of power, king of the Zulu. Yet a strange question emerged among his subjects and visiting traders. Where was the queen? Where were the royal children? As king, Shaka maintained a massive royal household, the Isigodlo filled with hundreds of young women. Many were his concubines, gifts from subjugated chiefs, symbols of his dominance. But Shaka never married. He never entered a formal union. He never produced a legitimate heir. This wasn't an oversight. It was a deliberate, ruthlessly enforced policy. The king, who commanded tens of thousands, had made a shocking decision. He would never father a recognized child. Historical accounts and Zulu oral traditions contain disturbing allegations that any woman in the Isigodlo found to be pregnant was immediately executed, along with her unborn child. While some traditions mention a possible unacknowledged son who may have escaped, Shaka left no official successor. Why this violent rejection? Political paranoia. Shaka understood power because he had seized it through violence. A son, especially a crown prince, could become a rallying point for dissent, a rival waiting to happen. By refusing to name an heir, he refused to create a weapon that could be turned against him. Psychological trauma. The boy, tormented for his illegitimacy, carried those scars to the throne. Some historians speculate he developed a pathological aversion to fatherhood, resolving never to inflict on a child what he had endured. Others suggest a darker interpretation. His obsession with his hard-won status made him jealous of anyone with an easier claim to power. The ultimate control? Other kings were links in a dynastic chain? Shaka saw himself as the chain itself, personal, absolute, irreplaceable. His Isigodlo wasn't a nursery for a dynasty. It was a sterile court, its potential for new life extinguished by the king's paranoia. He was father to a nation of warriors, but a killer of his own unborn children. For years, Shaka reigned from his fortress of calculated brutality. His empire was stable. His army seemed unbeatable. But his carefully controlled world was about to shatter, destroyed by the one personal attachment he could never sever. His love for his mother, Nandi, the Queen Mother, Enlevakaze, great she-elephant, was perhaps the only human being Shaka truly trusted. She had suffered beside him, protected him, believed in him when the world called him worthless. In October 1827, she died of dysentery. When the news reached Shaka, something inside him broke. The man who had built an empire on suppressing emotion was consumed by grief that tipped into madness. He decreed a national mourning period on a scale never seen before, but this wasn't shared grief. It was about forcing an entire nation to feel his agony. The decrees were suicidal for the kingdom. For 1 year, no crops were to be planted, no milk could be consumed. It was to be poured on the ground. Thousands of cattle were slaughtered so their calves would know what it's like to lose a mother. All sexual intercourse was forbidden. Any woman found pregnant was to be executed along with her husband. The kingdom plunged into nightmare. During the initial frenzy at Nandi's funeral, accounts claim as many as 7,000 people were killed for supposedly not showing sufficient grief. Now, on top of this terror came famine and state-sanctioned murder. This was no longer the calculated brutality of a strategic leader. This was the unhinged rage of a man willing to destroy his own empire. His generals were terrified. His own family watched in horror. The king was no longer a protector, he was devouring his own nation. And in the shadows, the knives were being sharpened. An empire built on fear can only last so long. In September 1828, with Shaka's army away on a distant campaign and his royal kraal lightly guarded, His half-brothers Dingan and Mylangana, who feared and resented his tyranny, conspired with a servant named Mabopa. They found the king near a cattle enclosure, and they stabbed him to death. Shaka's death was a direct consequence of the systems he created. By ensuring he had no son to challenge him, he also ensured he had no son to defend him. By refusing to name an heir, he created a power vacuum his brothers eagerly filled. As he lay dying, legend says Shaka uttered a final prophetic warning: "You kill me thinking you will rule, but the swallows will do that." He was referring to the white settlers who built their mud houses like Swallow nests who would one day conquer the empire his brothers now claimed. Even in his final moments, he understood that the instability he'd created would ultimately weaken the kingdom for outsiders to exploit. Shaka Zulu remains one of history's most complex figures, simultaneously visionary and tyrant, nation builder and destroyer, military genius and psychological victim. His achievements were staggering: transformed military tactics across southern Africa, united scattered clans into a powerful empire, created administrative and military systems that lasted generations, became a symbol of African resistance and pride. But his personal tragedy was complete: died without wife or recognized children. Killed by his own family, left no legitimate heir, created instability that would haunt the Zulu kingdom. The paradox of Shaka Zulu is this: he succeeded brilliantly in building a nation, but failed utterly in building a life. His childhood trauma bred deep distrust of family. His political genius weaponized that distrust into policy. His paranoia ensured his own isolation. And his psychotic grief after his mother's death revealed him as a broken man, paving the way for his assassination. The warrior king who made the earth tremble died as he had lived, a figure of immense power and profound, self-inflicted loneliness. Was Shaka Zulu a visionary nation-builder who forged unity from chaos? Or a bloodthirsty tyrant whose trauma turned genius into madness? The truth, like the man himself, refuses simple answers. What do you think? Let us know in the comments below.